Today, in the fifth episode of our series, where we weave the roots of the global order thread by thread, we are putting under the microscope the Pax Britannia period. How a single empire took the world into its hands, both militarily and economically. We will talk about how the 1815 Vienna Order, rising from the ashes of Napoleon, turned the world into a unipolar arena, and how the Industrial Revolution, which replaced human muscle power with the tremendous energy of coal and steam, turned global balances upside down. Furthermore, we will unfold one by one how Britain used the Ottoman Empire as a buffer state against Russia for its own survival, how the giants of the ancient world, China and India, were dragged into an economic collapse, and how the codes of the global strategy carried out by America today were written in London 200 years ago. If you are ready for that era, when the fate of the world was redrawn in factories, battlefields, and secret diplomatic tables, we begin. Before we begin, in order to leave no missing point in this series, where we take the global world order from its foundations to the present day, we recommend that you watch the previous videos in order. Mastering the entirety of the story will facilitate the analyses. When the history stage witnessed the famous Vienna Peace Conference, 1815, which determined the world order after the Napoleonic Wars, this summit created a unipolar world led by England. This global position reached by the British Empire after 1815 is very similar to the Roman Republic defeating Carthage in the Second Punic War, 201 BC, to become the sole superpower of the Mediterranean, and to the absolute power situation of the United States after winning the Cold War in 1991. As a matter of fact, some scientists define this period between 1815 and 1914 as Pax Britannia, derived from the Roman Republic's famous term Pax Romana. This definition describes the rapid and continuous growth of the global system without entering a major total war, thanks to the massive economic, military, and diplomatic power of the British Empire. Although the same term was put forward as Pax Americana for the USA in 1991, this theoretical definition would be shelved with the large-scale terrorist attacks on September 11, 2001. When we look behind the scenes of the Congress of Vienna, although the Russian Empire remained as England's only major power ally, Russia's unparalleled land power was balanced by the Austrian Empire and Prussia. England's arch-rival, France, was not overly damaged at the Congress of Vienna and was preserved in the system as a great power. Because it was now impossible for France to seek a new adventure in Europe after the Napoleonic Wars. The four victorious powers of the war, Britain, Austria, Prussia, and Russia, had formed strong political and military alliances that encircled France's borders like a belt of steel. As a matter of fact, France would never seek an adventure aiming for European hegemony after 1815. With the Congress of Vienna, Europe had fully digested this tough French morsel. Meanwhile, the place and fate of the Ottoman Empire, which had not been invited to the Congress of Vienna, in the world order was also determined in these years. The decline of the Ottoman Empire, which had been ongoing since the 16th century, when it was accepted as strongest, had accelerated thoroughly during the 1774 to 1815 period. As a matter of fact, even in the 1806 to 1812 Ottoman-Russian War, which coincided with a period when Russia's military power had thoroughly eroded while the Napoleonic Wars continued, the Ottomans were defeated, and the Russians captured Bessarabia in this war, standing at the gates of the Balkans for the first time. It is highly significant that this war was lost by the Ottomans after a huge Russian army was devastated by Napoleon at Austerlitz in December 1805. But the Ottomans would see a much more disastrous defeat in the 1828 to 1829 Ottoman-Russian War. The Russians would pass all fortified positions in the Balkans, capture the old imperial capital Edirne, and another Russian army would enter eastern Anatolia and conquer Erzurum. With this war, for the first time, apart from the territorial losses on its borders, the Ottoman Empire would also lose an independence war fought far from its own borderlines and accept the establishment of the Kingdom of Greece in the Peloponnese Peninsula. Despite this, the Ottoman Empire was in the position of an important and vital buffer state that needed to be protected against Russia in the strategy of the British Empire. The world's sole superpower was determined never, under any circumstances, to allow its ally, and at the same time rival, Russia, to become an overseas military and commercial power. This strategic approach of England would prolong the life of the Ottoman Empire for perhaps another 60 years. When the British later abandoned this strategy after the 1877 to 1878 Russian-Ottoman War, the War of 93, the end of the empire would now be clear. Another striking similarity showing that history consists of repetition is this. England's view of the Ottoman state in the 19th century is almost exactly the same as the USA's view of Turkey after 1946. The USA guaranteed to protect Turkey's territorial integrity against the Soviets in order to limit the expanding influence of the Soviet Union, which was its ally between 1941 to 1947 and its rival after 1948. Let us return to the breathtaking economic and political events of the 19th century. At the beginning of this century, it was not only geopolitical power that made England unique. The Industrial Revolution would provide England with an unquestionable superiority. The Industrial Revolution, unlike political revolutions, such as the 1776 American Revolution, the 1789 French Revolution, the 1830 and 1848 revolutions, or the 1917 October Revolution, was a slow and gradual development. However, its transformative power was much deeper. Before the Industrial Revolution, an important revolution had taken place in agriculture, and between 1700 and 1850, crop yields per acre had increased 2.5 to 3 times. Charles Townshend's invention of crop rotation and methods such as the seed drill and sowing machine, developed by the English agricultural scientist Jethro Tull, suddenly increased agricultural productivity per person and per area to incredible levels. While the increase in agricultural productivity supported population growth all over Europe, the development of the steam engine invention from different angles by Thomas Newcomen, Matthew Boulton, and James Watt would ignite the Industrial Revolution. The idea of burning coal instead of human power to turn water into steam and converting the expansion force of steam into kinetic energy would suddenly bring the output of business lines such as paper, yarn, steel, and weaving to unpredictable levels. Civilization had now found an alternative to converting the energy gained by consuming agricultural products into work through muscle power. The energy hidden inside coal was turning into a massive kinetic energy with the steam engine. With the application of rotary power transmission inside machines, the power of the steam engine would be used in many production processes. It was certainly no coincidence that the Industrial Revolution started in England. The British Empire possessed liberal and mature state institutions for its time. Property law was comprehensive and supportive of entrepreneurs. Most importantly, coal and iron were abundant, of high quality, and close to the surface in England. Extracting them was easy and cheap at the beginning of the Revolution. On the other hand, relative wages in England were generally high. These economic variables merged with brilliant ideas and inventions to create a massive revolution. The fact that the British Empire had become a mature overseas empire after the 7 Years' War would accelerate the revolution even further. Because the empire's colonies in North America, India, Oceania, and Africa provided the desired raw materials at the requested prices, and England's industrial output was sent to these markets as a finished product at the desired prices. It was clear that the British colonies had no say in terms of raw material exports and finished product imports, and none of them were organized economically, politically, and militarily in the way the Americans were when they won their independence. The Industrial Revolution would give England, and later the West, such an economic, military, and political power that it would be impossible for the rest of the world to stand up against the West for a century. If the American Revolutionary War had been fought after the maturation of the Industrial Revolution, it too would have probably failed. In the face of this massive power of the West, while the Ottoman Empire would enter a definitive decline throughout the 19th century, the Chinese Empire, which was the largest economy in the world until the 19th century, would go toward an even more disastrous collapse. However, it should be especially noted here that, unlike other nations, the Ottoman and Chinese empires, unlike the great and ancient states of the world, such as India and Egypt, would never turn into a Western colony. The Industrial Revolution also paved the way for a massive urbanization. While the population of cities in England before the Revolution was 20% of the total population, a century later, the total population of cities would constitute 80% of the total. However, this Industrial Revolution would exploit human labor to the dynamic end. Working hours reached 16 hours a day, and people went home almost only to sleep. Because the Agricultural Revolution left people unemployed in agriculture and created an environment where they would work like slaves in cities, people had no choice but to migrate to cities and work in workshops and factories. Especially in the rapidly developing textile and weaving industry, children and women were employed without any rules, being sought after due to their slender hands. It is not surprising that an important part of 19th century literature put this tragedy into writing. Worse still, using coal so limitlessly would lead to the pollution of water and air in cities. European cities were not planned to keep such a large population living healthily. After the fall of Rome in 476 AD, an important part of Rome's sanitary knowledge was either lost or forgotten. For instance, Prince Albert, the husband of Queen Victoria, who left her mark on the 19th century as the Queen of England and Empress of India, would lose his life due to typhoid caught from the palace toilet. Just think about the life of ordinary workers. On the other hand, with the spread of the English agricultural revolution to Europe, the population of Europe would continue to increase incredibly. While the total population of Europe was 140 million in 1750, it would rise to 266 million in 1850. The Industrial Revolution would further widen the power gap between Europe and the rest of the world by also increasing the per capita productivity of the rapidly growing yet miserable population. I would like to convey to you the words of David Lanz, a professor of economics and history at Harvard University, whose works I always read with admiration and who manages to explain the power of the Industrial Revolution simply. In 1870, when England was at the peak of its power, it was using 100 million tons of coal per year, and the energy created from this amount of coal is equivalent to the calories that would feed 850 million adult men, excluding the wives and children of these men, under the conditions of the same period. The population of England in 1870, excluding its colonies, was only 31 million people. We can understand the massive productivity increase power of the Industrial Revolution from this simple example. Again, the horsepower of England's steam engine in the same year was equal to the muscle power of 40 million adult men. Of course, this massive increase in productivity disrupted all balances of the world. While Europe's share in world production was 28.1% in 1800, it would rise to 61.3% in 1880. Although the USA joined the race later, it would increase its share from 0.1% in 1800 to 14.7% in 1880, coming second after England. Let us note that the USA surpassed England in terms of GDP in 1871 to reach the first place, and after 1880 it industrialized rapidly and came first in total production share as well. Those who suffered the real disaster were India, which was a British colony, and China, the largest state of the ancient world. While China carried out exactly 33.3% of world production in 1800, its share had declined to 12.5% by the time it reached 1880. China's share in total production would fall to 6.2% in 1900, after the Boxer Rebellion. India, on the other hand, when it was not yet fully colonized in 1750, made 24.5% of world production, whereas in 1880, its share had dropped to 2.8%. Today, the leaders of China always remember the industrial productivity lost against the West in the 19th century, and the tragic results of the Opium Wars and the Boxer Rebellion, which ended in disasters. The Industrial Revolution changed not only production, but also transportation and communication fundamentally. For example, while the road network in England was a sea of mud crawling with highwaymen, the Revolution first improved the country's waterways, creating a complex canal system of 3,600 kilometers where trade developed. Later, the British, discovering that steam power would create machines with very strong pulling power, created the railway. In the second phase of the Industrial Revolution, the British Empire had become a massive power, connected to its colonies from the homeland by means of telegraphs and steamships. Making numerous and high-quality rifles and cannons, thanks to their ability to process iron even during the Napoleonic Wars, the British rapidly moved from muzzle-loading rifles to breech-loading rifles, which had reduced deviation, increased firing speed, and range. And after the 1860s, they produced the first machine guns of the Gatling and Maxim type. The undisputed ruler of the open seas, the British Royal Navy, clinched their colonialism in Africa, China, and India this time by entering large rivers like the Niger, Yangtze, and Indus, with gunboats operating on steam power. The famous economist and statistician William Stanley Jevons summarized England's power as follows: "The plains of North America and Russia are our cornfields, Chicago and Odessa our granaries, Canada and the Baltic our timber forests, Australasia contains our sheep farms, and in Argentina and on the western prairies of North America are our herds of oxen. Peru sends her gold. The South American and Australian gold flows to London. The Hindus and the Chinese grow tea for us, and our coffee, sugar, and spice plantations are all in the Indies. The southern states of the USA provide us with cotton." If you notice, this rhetoric is exactly the same as the view in the government circles of the United States today. From a powerful mercantilist empire of the 18th century, the British Empire had rapidly become a single superpower, of which the modern capitalist system was an inseparable part. However, the variables providing the relative superiority of the British would be copied very quickly. The USA, the former 13 colonies of the empire, would use new technologies like a lever in its continental-sized rich lands, and with its population increasing via immigrants. More importantly, cracks were beginning to form in the Vienna system. In 1830, the reaction against the return to absolute monarchy in France would trigger a series of romantic revolutions across Europe. The British remained indifferent to this series of revolutions, but the 1848 revolution, which would explode afterward, changed everything. This revolution was a powerful reaction against the Industrial Revolution. More importantly, the Russians made a show of force by marching their armies into Hungary to help their allies against the Hungarian uprising that broke out in Austria. The 1848 revolutions wrapped Europe, but were never as definitive in results as the 1789 French Revolution. However, socialist ideas began to spread among workers for the first time. In this stormy environment, Russia would carry its role as the gendarme of Europe in the 1848 revolutions further, and make an untimely move for itself, deciding to deliver the coup de grace, meaning the finishing blow, to the Ottoman Empire. However, the British, French, Ottoman, Piedmont coalition would bring Russia to its knees in the Crimean War. With the 1848 Revolution and the Crimean War, the Vienna Order was now completely shaken. While Europe was adjusting these accounts, thousands of kilometers to the west, the Americans were about to enter a war with Mexico over Texas, a disputed region. The events that took place in that wooden Los Alamos fort, which stood almost like a shantytown next to the massive fortifications of Europe, were the beginning of the series of events that would bring the USA into the class of great powers. Our The Story of the Global Order playlist will continue with the 6th episode, The Rise of the Young United States video. For this reason, we recommend that you follow the notifications. If you liked our video, do not forget to subscribe, like the video, and turn on the notification bell for the continuation of such in-depth analyses. I wish your mind to be clear and your days to be informative. And remember, latet enim veritas, sed nihil pretiosius veritate.